Today's guest, Tony Riddle, is someone who I've admired for a very long time. I've read his book, Be More Human, multiple times, and a lot of what he talks about is very difficult to disagree with. He's a natural lifestyle coach. I guess you could call him that. But he's also a barefoot, ultra-endurance athlete and record breaker. And in this conversation, you'll hear a little bit about how he thinks and what he coaches and what his philosophy is. But it only touches the surface. We talk a bit about the benefits of barefoot running and walking and living. That is how I first came across his work, but he's someone who embodies what he does like no one else, embodies his philosophy like no one else. It's so refreshing to have in this space, in this coaching space, this wellness space, someone who truly returns back to the natural human that we should return to. We live in such an artificial, unnatural way, and Tony encourages people to return back to nature, to challenge ourselves and our bodies, to challenge the ideas that we are limited, that our bodies are limited, that as we age, we fade, and to realize our human potential, both physically, psychologically, neurologically, biologically. It's refreshing. We start the conversation with a bit of down regulation. I said to him before we pressed record that I was such a big fan that I needed to down regulate, and so we did some breath work at the start, and so it's a refreshing start to an episode. He's such a good guy, and he gave me a huge amount of his time, and I really appreciate it. As someone who has admired him and his work for so long, I hope sincerely that you get something from this, and I know you will. Without further introduction, I bring you Tony Riddle.
I don't know about you, but I always feel when I'm just about to start these conversations, there's a little bit of the edge of nerve, right? But it's excitement nerves, but that can also perhaps challenge what we might want to voice, and we go, oh my God, I wish I'd said that. And I remember that. So I'd start with a little bit of down regulation. There's breath, right?
Yeah.
And this can speak to the runners in the group, because that can mean, burning out before you get to the start line even, calming that nervous system. So I always play with just looking to get a bit taller. So imagine having like a giant pair of hands pulling you from the head up, lengthening spine. And then place one hand on the belly and one hand on the chest. So you allow those areas to almost nestle, so like they're resting on your hands. So see if you can actually just let your belly rest for a moment. We get a bit tense down there, especially us runners, tense your core, tense your glutes, actually relax them, and allow your chest to relax. And then if you were to just simply place a really flat tongue in the roof of your mouth, you'll find your jaw and your throat will start to relax. And then we can invite a breath in through the nose. And if you just shut your eyelids down for a moment and see how long you can inhale for without creating any tension. So just with that tongue in the roof of the mouth, breathe into your face, like into your nose, not up your nose, but in. And just be aware of that belly hand getting a bit weightier. And then when you breathe out, it's the same. It's a long exhale out the nose, but without creating any tension. And extend it. And what we're looking to do is merge those breaths, so there's no pause between the two. It's like a gentle inhale into an exhale. And with each breath, see if you can get a little lighter, but still deep with that breath. And by extending those breaths, you'll probably find that it's about 10 seconds for a whole inhale and exhale. If we did 6 of those, that's a minute, right? And that's enough just to take the edge off. So if we do 12, let's say, 2 minutes of breath, it's nothing really, is it? Just all the way in. All the way out. Just feeling that belly and chest rise with the breath. And feel those hands get a little lighter on the exhale. And we'll work for 3 more cycles. That's it. All the way in. All the way out. Final 2 now, all the way in. All the way out. Okay, final breath. Let's take a nice lengthy inhale. And on this final exhale, we have like a big long sigh, like a... just let yourself relax with that sigh. Nice. Let's try one more of those. So all the way in, breathe it in. And again, a big long sigh, just let it go. Final one now, Tommy. Breathe it in. Big long sigh, let it go. And then when you open the eyelids, just butterfly them, kind of give them a bit of a flicker so we're not straight into the bright room. There you go. Nice little intro. How we doing?
Beautiful. Beautiful. That was a unique intro. Listeners, if you've just started a run, you probably weren't able to join in, but maybe you were.
Yeah, maybe it's a pre-run.
So where are you right now, Tony? Are you in Somerset?
Portugal.
You're
right
in
now.
Portugal. You're doing book things.
Actually, I came over here to hold a coaching certification.
Okay.
So I have this Nat Life coach certifications that I brought here, and we've been on the land and viewing land and the possibility of growing something here. And at the moment, we're between 2 plots. There's 2 pieces of land that we're looking at landing, literally landing,
Wow.
but bringing a whole philosophy to that space. So the natural lifestyle philosophy, but built into almost like an eco village, if you like, on land, and weaving the coaching philosophy into that. So if people just come and stay, they'd have Nat Life coaches to support them. And it's quite a project.
Yeah, I can imagine. Fun though.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Feels like a good time for me, just turned 50. So I feel like I'm moving into something,
Yeah.
the next layer of whatever that is. Yeah.
Do you have cold water out there?
The pool here is pretty cold.
Okay.
First thing in the morning. It's like 24 here yesterday. So the cold is still the cold. Like if I'm at home in the UK, for instance, and it's, can be pretty gnarly outside when you get in the water, there isn't so much of a difference. Whereas here it's 24 yesterday. So getting in the pool is like, ooh, there's an edge on that. And then if you apply the understanding that it's a minute for each degree, I took some coaches through that at the pool at the weekend on the certification, discussing cold water therapy, and brought them into the water. It was like 14 degrees in the water, so let's do 14 minutes. And you still get that shiver come, because it's a longer piece of time, and it's nice in a way because you can really play with that. So I'd have them calm, exactly like that breath, so tongue in the roof of the mouth and relaxing into the belly, and see if they can find that calm place in the water, especially as they start to, the limbic kickback is suggesting that it's getting a bit cold and making up all kinds of stories to try and convince you to get out. So it's then, can we calm that voice just with breath? And then I speak to the chaos that we might be experiencing in the world. It's pretty chaotic out there at the moment, right? So I'd have them thrashing around in the water all of a sudden, and then thrashing to upregulate the system, and then back to calm. See how quickly you can calm that nervous system again by tongue in the roof of the mouth, relax the breath. And then by being in the water and being perfectly still, you get like a thermal barrier comes around the body, and then bringing... We understand mantra, and sometimes we can go a bit woo-woo with that language, and I think it can turn people off, but there's a particular part of your brain called the reticular activation system, and it's literally like a gatekeeper. So whatever you want to allow through the gate from your subconscious into your conscious, and that can be simple mantra like I am warm, or it's a warm barrier around me, and you bring warmth in rather than I don't want to be cold, because you're still using the language of cold and I don't want. So that gets through the gate. So this is very much like the language work that brings warmth into the experience. So it's a good opportunity, that length of time, sorry, going down a rabbit hole there, but to really play with tools and modalities like breath and the inner language, like the narrative that we can bring to the game as well for all kinds of performance, right?
Yeah, I mean, this is the stuff I love about running. We talk a lot on this podcast about ultra running and playing with, I guess, that narrative and trying to reframe suffering or pain, at least. Reframing pain. Sometimes we see pain as suffering and trying to reframe that as just sensation. All of this stuff is fascinating to me. I mean, I was doing some ice bath stuff the other day. It was 2 degrees. 2 degrees. And
it's a beautiful temperature,
that is so Baltic. And you're just immediately fighting. You're just immediately in this fight mode, what you're calling this limbic kickback. And I guess there was a pool next to it. It was like 13 or 14 degrees. So it's kind of easier to just deal with that discomfort because it wasn't so bad. And you can kind of, I guess, be a little bit calmer in your narrative, right?
Yeah. There's the previous stories as well that we inherit about the cold, right? So examples could be, and this is storytelling is beautiful for this again, because hot water is a modern phenomena. Yeah. So imagine some stage to warm water, it would have been a huge task, right? So that might have meant, the saying, chop wood, carry wood, to make a fire, it warms you so many times, right? You have to chop the wood, carry the wood, light the fire. But now you're going to invite in, right, I'm doing all those things to light the fire, and then I have to fetch the water. So that's another task. So based on a system that's constantly trying to weigh up threat, non-threat, fuel cost, metabolic cost, injury, it's probably less taxing to just get in the cold water. So from a threat metabolic perspective, we wouldn't have been making all those calculations. Whereas now we just have hot water from a tap. So cold water seems like a massive extreme. But actually the stream wouldn't have been so extreme, And I think when it gets to real cold water, we're up against certain stories. And for some, we've been programmed with this narrative around cold, right? And what that can mean for us. And we might have had experiences where we did get really cold. So that's also stored in that subconscious layer. So before we even approach it, we're already terrified before we've even got in. And this is where breath work comes in, right? And we used to, and I love Wim's work because Wim really, it changed so much within the coaching world, especially when it came to breath and meditation with men's groups, right? Because prior to that, mostly breath work I'd teach or people that I would see, I'd say it was 80% women. And now it's a really even balance there. So that work really helped. What I started to see, however, before taking people into the cold, that alert sense of breath was somehow some people were getting more spiked when they were getting in, So I had a friend, Chris Baker, who was partner with another guy, James, and they had a podcast called We Move and a magazine that they launched. And we became friends. I was on the pod and they shot some stuff around my endurance events. And Chris had gone out and he'd spent some time recording Eddie Stern. And Eddie Stern was a Ashtanga teacher to Madonna, right? And the likes of Madonna. And he launched a breathing app. And it's just called Breathing App. It's brilliant. It's like,
I know
this. It's so simple.
So simple and amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just give it to all the clients, all the coaches, any coaches that are like, oh, what do you recommend for breathing? Just this.
Yeah.
You don't need, and you need the cues like what we were going through at the beginning, where you relax the belly, tongue in the roof of the mouth, but then you go into that 4/6 tempo, and it's just beautiful. So he came back with that, and we'd go to Hampstead Ponds at the time. I was living in Hampstead, and we'd get in over the winter, and it would be Baltic, right? It was proper cold there, and you'd be like cracking the ice to get in, and we were. And we'd be in the changing area doing our Wim breath, Wim Hof method. And then we'd walk along the jetty, and the jetty was concrete, so it'd be like freezing on the feet. And then we'd climb down the ladder, and we'd all be holding onto a ladder just up to our necks doing breath. And the first part, you'd have like this guy came out, and I've put this, I've just written a new book, so this is in the book because it was fascinating for me around story and cold water. So this guy comes out in a pair of budgie smugglers, probably in his 70s, barely hanging over his trunks, and just does like the cold water walk along the jetty, like not even phased. Gets up on the springboard and just like, and he's in and swims off. And he's like looking at us like, what are they doing? And it's just so familiar to him. Yeah. So it doesn't change for him. So we would go through those experiences. And then one day it was really hoofing down with rain. And Chris had just got back from seeing Eddie Stern, and he said, why don't we try this? And we put this, I had a studio in Camden at the time. I had an ice bath. It was a freezer that was set up on the terrace. And that was probably about 2, I'd say, in temperature. And you just open the lid and it was ready to go. But with this breathing app, we'd had it on the loudspeaker, and we all sitting in a circle, probably 12 of us, just with this breathing app set on 30 minutes. And then we'd reset it, right? So we were all just breathing in a circle to 4-6. And then one of us would get up and we'd go and get in the freezer, So the freezer setup is, it just fill it with water. I'd use pool paint, like the sealant inside, so it was sealed. And it's set on a timer, and it's on for 2 hours at 4 a.m. So by 6 it was always ready, but not on all night because you'd freeze or burn the motor out possibly by freezing a huge body of water. So it's proper cold. And each one of us would get in and spend our turn in there, and we'd return back to the circle. And what we found through down regulation in that circle, and then walking to the ice bath with the same breath, same sound, so it's like your coach coaching you through the breath, and then getting in and climbing in and extending the exhale as you're getting in, and then straight back into the breath, that you didn't get the fight and you didn't get triggered, and everyone doubled their time.
Wow.
So the 5-minute guys were 10 minutes. The 2-minute guys were 4 minutes, just through breath and calming that nervous system prior to the storm, during the storm, and after the storm. Powerful.
Yeah, it's powerful. I mean, so much in running is related to this idea of actually overcoming this, just getting used to discomfort. Like I was talking to someone yesterday about interval sessions, right? And he's not very used to them. And I said, just wait, the progress you make in the first few weeks of doing this sort of stuff will be huge, because the first session, you're not used to that discomfort. Like you'll panic when you feel your chest tighten up. You'll panic when you feel your breath start to speed up and all this stuff you're not used to. Your body will adapt over time. You'll see these physiological changes, obviously, in sort of 6 to 8 weeks. You'll get faster, more efficient, all that sort of stuff. But the progress you make initially will all be down to the fact that you will reframe this experience in your head naturally.
Yeah, the familiarity.
Yeah.
And you'll find that limbic kickback again. So I was coaching some guys, and we were out on a trot, and let's say they were only one of them was only familiar really with going to 5K, right? And we forget how sophisticated our systems are. So our sophisticated kind of system will know when it's 5K.
Yes.
Literally. It will know when it's 5.01. And so the moment it was like at 5K, triggers started happening. I can feel this happening. Yeah, I've got this thing going on in my knee. I always get this thing in my knee when I get past 5K. Okay, what I can see, so just observing you, we've got a little bit more coloration in the face now, and there's a bit of sweat on your vest. So I know from a metabolic system that's trying to conserve energy, and another system which is ultimately trying to remove the threat of injury, will create all kinds of wonderful, weird phantom systems, right? Phantom noises. And one of them in particular is going in your knee right now, because otherwise it would have been in before 5K. It's just, you've just gone over the 5K marker. So what we're going to do is we're going to stop for a moment. We're just going to bring that down regulation breath back in again. And we're going to go back to the specific drills that we were doing for your form and the pulling cycle and the cadence, which is like gentle hops and rhythmic jumps. And then we're going to go again. And then we went again and we did 10K. All nervous system, right? And regulation, self-regulation. And we don't really think about it for running. And it's not to say, you have to familiarize load as well. And load over time, because there's 2 times body weight in running, and people forget that's strength conditioning. It's not just cardiovascular. It's like there's 1 times your body weight when you stand, there's 1 times your body weight when you walk, but there's 2 times your body weight when you run, and it could be 2 to 3 times your body weight when you're going downhill. And so we have to be strong, not just long, lean runner beans, right? It's a strength conditioning exercise. Can you squat 2 times body weight? Because you're going to have to experience that when you're running, And if you can't squat it, can you jump from a height which would replicate in ground reaction forces your 2 times body weight? So there's that. The nervous system can also get triggered because it feels less confident in the physical vessel because it's not primed for that load over time. So, I think we just, I think we undermined how sophisticated our systems are, I guess, physiologically,
Yeah.
neurologically.
We also, I think, well, I get a lot of, I try and encourage people to do mobility and strength and kind of maybe spend a bit of time in the morning focusing on that sort of stuff, incorporate it in their day. I think a lot of people are so fixed on this idea of exercise, quote unquote exercise, right? Or training. And when they think of mobility, they think, I need to do my mobility or I need to do my strength training. One of the things I've always loved about the way you speak about movement is this idea of play. And reading one of your books, Be More Human, there's a little anecdote in there about a woman who had a knee issue and you started incorporating play and this kind of phantom pain, which is very real, a lot of pain. If you speak to any sort of pain consultant, a lot of that is related to the mind. That isn't to delegitimize the pain. That is a legitimate reason 100%. For pain. And there was this release of trauma and all sorts of stuff. But I've always loved this idea of play and how to and thinking about movement as play. Can you talk a little bit about how you get people to kind of reframe this idea of movement and mobility from being something I have to do in order to be strong for my running to something that is actually more a natural human endeavor and something playful?
Yeah, absolutely. I spent a good few days on this with the Nightlife coaches at the weekend. So my whole certification's this, essentially. There's breath, there's hot and cold contrast therapies, but there's a lot of movement and there's a lot of running analysis. And what underpins that, again, is running is play, just that we've made it very serious. And part of that is that we acquire a lot of stuff, gear, and with that comes all the gear, no idea. And the no idea part isn't an insult. It's because we are the gear. It's remembering that what did we do before all this stuff?
Yeah.
And how do we survive as persistent hunters, let's say, if we didn't have everything that we carry with us today? And it's playful. So the Tala Humala, you could speak to that, like Born to Run. Like that's that spiritual process that they have that is running, perfecting their form even is this huge spiritual process, but it comes through play. They're very playful in that sense, playing with running. Tag, I often play tag with my kids and I'll stick Strava on. You can smash out 5K playing tag. So for people that come and they might be clients for the coaches I was expressing at the weekend, they might, I don't like running. And then you could do some warm-up stuff with them to prep them at least, like the playful aspects even of that. Squatting and crawling, and they're very simple warm-ups, but what they're doing is they're crawling, for instance, is contralateral. So it's already priming the brain for a contralateral pattern, and running is a contralateral pattern. It's also nourishing ankle, foot function, knee function, hip function, all of those things, and that you can dance in and out of a squat and prime those. And it's less about stretching and formal flexibility. And through that, you can then just go, you're it, and run. And show me a human doesn't go, oh my God, yeah, I'm it. And it immediately brings in another layer of it. But to speak to the woman with it was at a festival. It's called Yoga Connects, that festival. And I'm not a yogi, but I was brought on board to hold a whole session. I entered this space and it was all very serious. All the yoga mats were lined up and shoes are very neat at the back of the tent. And I just walked in and said, I have to hand up. I'm not a yogi. But I am going to teach something about connection. And I put together a whole piece on play, and it just erupted in this space and had them moving. But if you were to think of some of those poses in yoga and suddenly put them, you're aware of Muybridge? Have you heard of Muybridge?
No.
So Muybridge was like the papa of cinematography in a way. You know, you'd have like, it could be the elephant or a horse on lots of cards and then spun in a wheel, and it would show you the horse running.
Yeah.
And he also had a running man, and then you can see the running posture, which was amazing because it was one that wasn't compromised by seated footwear or seated furniture or footwear. And with Muybridge's work, you can see how even in yoga, you could take a snapshot of each of those poses, but spin the wheel and you'd get some kind of locomotion. It could be like a down dog suddenly turning into an elephant walk, or, you know. So within that yoga practice, it was suddenly for them allowing them to get off the mat and what can be quite linear to suddenly a full expression of that movement. And so in a very short window of time, I had someone she come up to me at the end and just said, oh, I don't know what was going on, but I have had this knee injury for years. It's been really compromising my yoga, and it's gone like that. And so I think in the book I joke that I put my hands on her head and I go, praise the Lord.
yeah, you do.
But really it's just play. And what you're doing is you're getting past that part of the brain that's pinning all that attention and awareness on that, which is just safety and protection again. And it's not to say again that there isn't something there, but it's masking itself as a protection. So it creates tension to prevent that. So play, I would say, it's really atrophied in the adult, and I saw it a lot at the weekend. It takes a moment. So we use certain icebreakers to start to get people familiar with even making connection with another human. And the reason I express that is because most probably will appear at a workshop or for a one-to-one, or maybe even a running event where they've been on the public transport. And that involves making eye contact, not looking at anyone. So already that's nervous system response, isn't it, right? And then they're going to turn up at an event, and so it's to even view the experience as you can use language. I get to run today, not I've got to run today. I have to. So you can be playful with language. You can be playful with the expression of running. Like, can I do specific drills that feel much lighter for me? And then through the act of play, we can also start to access, I would say, the same parasympathetic state you can find with breath work. I think when we view exercise through that lens, you have to remember that it's inherited in a way, and we've created certain templates. So you and I, did you go to school?
I went to school.
Yeah, my kids aren't at school, right? We've unschooled them, but I went to school, so I can speak to it from my side. And I'm 50, so it became even more challenging between movement and exercise because of health and safety, right? So we would have had play up until a certain point, age, and then you enter a schooling system where that play is a set time, which is on a playground, and that's adult supervised. Yeah, so up until that point, you're very playful, very expressive. Things like tag would have just been like, oh, is that it? Because you would have been so expressive. And you largely can play anything. You enter this realm of imagination where you can impersonate anything. We have this beautiful ability to impersonate all the other animals, right? So you can be anything you want. And in the childhood sense, we are that. Our imagination brain leads us down that path. Then you enter a system where that part of the brain is kind of being a bit suppressed because we're now we want the logical part of the brain for remembering facts and information to pass tests. But in the earlier stage of that, there's a culturing out of the playful side. So we go, remove play, you're only allowed that for 1 hour a day now, which is lunch break, on the playground. And the rest of the time is in the classroom experience, which might involve sitting. And you're recently posting a lot around squatting, aren't you? So you're becoming more familiar with squatting being our natural rest position, which is the very foundation of the more complex movement of standing, walking, running, sprinting. Whereas chair sitting is not a foundational movement of standing, walking, running, sprinting, because you're not born on a chair. A chair is a modern phenomena, Renaissance period, right? Whereas prior to that, we're a ground-sitting being, and parts of the globe actually still are. There's probably a more percentage of people on the planet that don't use chairs than there are those that use chairs. So when we're encouraged to sit for then 6 hours a day and only 1 hour of play, that play eventually turns into PE, physical education, right? Not physical experience or physical expression, but an education, which is also adult-led, which also brings in things like competition, sets, reps, sport, rather than play. So we've lost the full expression of our abilities to impersonate any animal, and we're now impersonating the adult at the front of the class because they're the teacher, and yet their movement is hugely compromised as an adult. But that's the teacher. So the exercise template comes in very early, whereas movement is just a playful expression, right? So we have complex movements within us, and we have foundational movements. And our complex movements, like walking, running, sprinting, climbing, lifting, carrying, throwing, defending, jumping, balancing, are only as good as our foundational movements. And the foundational movements, one, we could say is squatting. There's kneeling, there's side sitting, there's hanging, there's gripping for climbing, for instance. There's balancing, there's low gait walking. And again, each of those helps liberate our joints and also helps liberate our posture, reinforces posture. It's all core stability rather than exercise for core stability that only makes you stronger at the exercise, but doesn't overlap naturally into the discipline. Whereas all those foundational movements that you'll see in nature, where it doesn't involve sitting or exercise, each of those has a purpose towards the bigger purpose, which would have always been to minimize risk of injury and for efficiency, because that metabolic cost piece is really important. We might not have been successful at foraging or hunting. What would that have been? Well, how would that have played out for us? So we had to move in a really sophisticated way. And our whole physiology and anatomy has been designed for what you and I love doing, which is running.
As you speak, I have so many questions.
Yeah.
And I am also conscious that you are speaking to a member of the choir right now.
Yeah.
But there will be listeners who may see a lot of what you're saying. I would say less the stuff that sort of intuitively makes sense to us about movement and human potential, but some of the other stuff, when we're trying to incorporate all of this into modern life, it starts to seem really extreme. So even there would be parents listening who, send their kids to school and they hear, there's people who homeschool their kids all over the place, but they hear all this stuff about kind of trying to live more naturally in a very unnatural world. And everything is so against that. The schooling system is so against that. Everything we look at seems so against that, especially in kind of Western societies. I want to talk a little bit, though, about the barefoot running stuff. You first came on my radar, I don't even know how long ago, maybe sort of 7 or 8 years ago. And it was in relation to barefoot shoes, barefoot running. And that was a bit of a breakthrough for me. I have, and have always had, very narrow feet. My toes are pretty scrunched up. And for the last 5 years, I've been doing my best to wear shoes that have a wider toe box. Mm-hmm. I have been trying to incorporate barefoot shoes and being barefoot as much as possible. I haven't seen a huge amount of progress in terms of my feet becoming more natural in how they look, in terms of like more splayed toes. But I do think, as someone who's flat-footed, I've seen more progress in and having more of an arch and more strength in my feet. Anyway, that's sort of by the by. But the other day I was wearing some sandals for my run and didn't say anything about it really, but someone commented or messaged and said there's no evidence about this, or they said something along the lines of like, the evidence says otherwise, and I wasn't even making a point. What would you say to people who are very sort of opinionated about barefoot stuff, or think it might be a bit woo-woo, as you said before, or a bit extreme, and those who are sort of resistant also to anecdotal evidence?
Okay. Yeah. I think I'm going to rewind a little because I want to honour what you were saying there around parents that have their kids at school.
Yes. Yeah.
Because this also relates to the next part as well. Yes, sometimes what we can hear can feel quite extreme to us, but we have to understand there's social norms and there's biological norms, and all I'm expressing is a biological normal template. So that can be perceived as socially extreme, and with that can be quite triggering, and sometimes we might not then get past being able to listen to it.
Yeah.
I have lots of friends, family, people in my community, and coaches that I coach that all their kids are at school. And so really that language is still important because it's what they do outside of that school experience that counts. You know, you can still be incredibly playful with your kids. You can still nourish their movement. And at the same time, you become very playful and you can also nourish your own movement. And part of that would be also getting their feet out and allowing their feet to express. So I was asked by a creative group called Busy Buttons, and they would have kids go in the school breaks to attend their classes. It was like a program that you would be in for the terms. An incredibly creative, amazing couple, Lau and Luella, there you go. And so they asked me to hold a rewilding kind of reconnection experience for the kids. And so we went to Virginia Water. We had this coach booked and we arrived. And I thought, yeah, okay, let's get all the kids in a circle. And I sat them round. I was like, can we just close our eyelids down for a moment and relax our bellies and just have a listen to the sounds? What can you hear? And one of them went, a lion, you know, and there's the imagination brain going off, right? So we then got past that and I was like, okay, what I'd like you to do is just take your shoes and socks off. And they were like, what? You know, because the immediate reaction was just to take your shoes and socks off. Just want that to land for a moment. Regardless of the science and however you perceive it, it's perfectly natural to take your shoes and socks off. But it was such a massive thing that some of them were quite triggered by it, right? Once they got them off, their feet touched the grass and there was that moment of, should I be doing this? And then they went, boom, on the earth. And they were off, Tommy. I mean, like, literally off, screaming, yelling, running around. And it was just a beautiful sight. And so Lau and Luella are like, Tony, what are we going to do with them now? I said, we're just going to stand here and just admire this for a moment, you know? Because it was so beautiful. They'd gone from being like quite strict in their forms to suddenly very expressive. So there's some amazing studies out there. And one of them is Chris Dorp from the University of Liverpool. Yeah. And returning people back to barefoot footwear for a period of time, short window of time, and they found they improve their foot strength. Yeah. By, I think it's like 60%, right? And then they did a study then in the elderly. And this is really important because I coach all different ages and the coaches that I coach need to understand this too, right? So there's a longevity piece in there that is so profound because it's not just for the group, it's for us, for when we reach that age from now, and also for the kids who took their shoes off at Virginia Water. Because what they found by returning in this group of elderly to being barefoot or wearing minimalist footwear in this case, that they had a huge increase in balance. Yeah. And so it's 40%, right? Increase in balance. That's massive within a group in such a short window of time. That's not exercise for balance. That's just changing the footwear that underbeds the foot. And so what that then speaks to is the other study, which suggests that if you're over the age of 60, you fall over due to balance, poor balance, and you break your hip, there's a chance that you might not come out of that hospital, and there's a chance that you might not survive that year. A high percentage of that. So they're big studies, right? Now, outside of that, we understand that the human foot has 33 articulating joints, 26 bones, 100 muscles, tendons, ligaments, 200,000 extra receptors in the sole of your foot, right? And unfortunately, when you put that foot into something quite narrow, it changes the expression of what we know as the great toe, the biggest toe. It's 4 times denser and thicker than all the other smaller toes. So it's designed for leverage and anchoring us, right? And also pivoting. But when it's in this position, unfortunately, you can't then lever off of that. What we tend to do is just have just a little, it's not huge, and it depends on the individual and the footwear. But what we start to get is an over-supinate to over-pronate pattern that starts to occur. The ankle can't dorsiflex then how it should. We get like a sagittal blockade in the ankle. That redirects forces either into the lower extremity or up into the knee, right? So there's an interesting spike in running injuries around the time that running footwear came into play. And I've even been hit with, but we've evolved since then. And that footwear only really come into play since 1969, right? I was born in 1975, and I'd like to say I'm the same, Homo sapien, right? And I'd like to think that the same physiology is shaped by running. So there's a challenge there, right, when we hear stuff like that. Anything that's quite compliant underneath the foot can lead to quite stiff, rigid feet. So what we're seeing is that there's a story around being flat-footed, which really there aren't flat feet, there's collapsed ankles. So there's an element of the ankle collapsing, that then leads to a perception of a flat foot. Because if you were to lift your foot up, if you perceive you have a flat foot, just lift your foot up in front of a mirror and have a look. That you'll find when the foot's off the ground, you'll have an arch. Yeah, it's when it's on the ground. And I can see it in your squat. So there's stuff you're doing I can advise you in your squat at the moment.
Yeah, please, yeah.
That will help support that. So what's the widest area of the human foot?
The ball of the foot.
Yeah, it's got the toe box. What would be the toe box, right? Or we know it as ball girth. It's kind of like that area there, the widest part from here to here, right? And so what's the most narrow part?
The heel.
Yeah, and if you strip that tissue away, how narrow? Because the calcaneus is tiny underneath that. So if you were to think of like a wider base of support is possibly the most stable. So what area of the foot do you think's appropriate for load based on that model?
The front, the toe box.
The widest part, right? And the great toe is like 4 times denser and thicker than the smaller toe. So again, which one would you really want to be levering off?
The big one.
Whereas if you get most modern footwear and you were to put your foot on a piece of paper and you draw around that piece of paper, you'll find that the foot, actually, even if you've been conditioned into your feet looking like this because you've always worn narrow shoes, you'll find still that widest area will still be the toe box. Yeah, if you put a conventional running shoe on there, you draw around it, you'll find the toe box is actually more narrow. You probably find most of your smart casual wear, office wear is still that. So I like to think that nature knows best, in a way, how to design physiology, anatomy, and then that allows me to create the right systems to do with the forces. So you have kinetics is kind of the forces that are involved in movement, let's say running in this case, so gravity. And then you have how we react to gravity, ground reaction force. And then you have kinematics, which is the shapes you make due to those forces. So how do we recognize gravity and ground reaction force when we're running? Where do we recognize that?
In our joints and in
our feet. The first point is our base of support. Gravity becomes tangible through your body weight, through your points of support. So if you have 200,000 receptors in that foot and you have all those amazing bones, tendons, joint actions, and the widest part of your foot, it kind of gives you an understanding. When you just understand all of that, you go, oh, wow, okay, that's very sophisticated. And there's 3 certain shapes that you make in bipedalism as an upright biped like us. One of them is walking, one is running, and one is sprinting. And because of the forces, gravity and ground reaction force, we change shape due to those forces. So we have a walking shape, a running shape, and a sprinting shape. Like a horse will walk canter, gallop. No, walk, trot, canter, gallop. It has 4, right? So it changes shape. So we have 3, right, in that sense. And we have different rocking actions in our feet due to those forces. So when we walk, we use a heel rocker, we use an ankle rocker, and a forefoot. So it's like going heel, midfoot, forefoot. When we sprint, we're forefoot, but when we run, we're midfoot, forefoot. So it's like 3 very sophisticated again, right? And what enables that, again, is the fact that we have this sensory awareness, the shape of the foot, all those joint actions, and the signal to our sophisticated movement brain, like the transient impact, to say, change shape. It's no longer appropriate to land in those areas. And the more and more compliance you put between you and the earth, the more you dumb down what would be that signal. So suddenly the shapes that you're making aren't appropriate for the forces. And so we start to see more of a walking shape playing out in a running shape. Yeah. You can then unpack like the model of compliance and stiffness. So we speak to this a lot. The more compliant a surface, the more stiff we can become.
Yeah.
So if you and I've got very hard floor in here. If I jump up and down on that floor, what gives? Is it me or is it the floor? It has to be the floor. It has to be me, right? Because the floor's stiff. So I become and what allows that is those muscular tendon actions plus my joints. So I'm very elastic in that sense, which is running. Running's a beautiful elastic moment, right? Whereas if I jump up and down on something that's quite rubberized, there's a certain lag in that process. Until that rubber gets more stiff, does my brain recognize the stiffness and will come off again? Does that make sense? So there can be a delay in the reaction to that surface. And therefore, I become a bit stiffer in that process. So there's me stiff, rubberized surface compliant, and the surface below becomes stiff. So if we then start to think of tendons and muscle tendon actions, one could call it a misfiring within that process because of that delay, that lag. And then if we then throw in the narrow toe box and the ability for that compliance to collapse. So you might find if you look at your running shoes, they're a bit collapsed on one side compared to the other. It's essentially you're loading areas that aren't designed for load. Yeah. And the material's compliant and you're going to keep compressing that. You could go, oh, it's okay, I can put an orthotic in there or whatever that might be. But the orthotic isn't on a hard surface, it's still on a soft surface. So when you put your foot on it, it's still going to collapse into that surface. And other stuff that isn't really recognized when it comes to how we land or even what we're landing in terms of footwear is posture. So I know if I analyze someone on a treadmill from behind, but I don't address certain things within their posture, they're going to land on certain areas of the feet, which would mean more supinated and then more pronated as a byproduct of that. Whereas if I simply lift their head and lift their chest, so they're looking ahead, not down, their feet will start to land more underneath them. And you get less and less of the over-supination, pronation expression because the foot doesn't need to land so far ahead. Ultimately, your foot has to land under your head. So if your head's way forward of your hip, you're going to land way forward to deal with that. Right. Otherwise, you'll fall over. You have to fall over. So there's the posture and there's the footwear is part of that conversation. And then that brings in the ground rest positions and the mobility, because that will help them feed the posture that is appropriate for running. As in, running is a complex movement and the foundational movements are only as good. The complex movements are only good as foundational movements. And the foot really, for me, is the very foundation of running. So it's really important to, even if you want to still wear compliant footwear, I've got clients that I still put in compliant footwear, but I choose a wide toe box for them. And that's not it, though. That's not enough. So what you're experiencing is, yes, your arches are starting to pick up because what you're doing is you're landing or trusting more of that front area of the foot and less of the heel. But that's not enough. You have to do the work outside of it. So the foundations of that more complex movement would be practices like toga. We don't have to go too far into that because there's loads of information out there. You can pick up YouTube videos on that. But what that allows is you start to reconnect to your feet and your feet start to reconnect to the shape that is necessary to deal with the forces that are involved in running. So that kinematics is even down to the shape of the foot that is there to deal with the forces in ground reaction force when the foot lands underneath the body. So long-winded way of saying, really you need to restore your feet. It's not just about barefoot footwear. It's not just about sandals. It's about reconnecting with the shape of the foot, the human foot, not the compromised human foot, which we've been led to believe is the shape of the human foot.
Well, I have to say, the good news is I've come a long way in the last sort of 5 years since coming across your work. And I'm not sure I really ever noticed my sort of collapsed arches before only a few years ago. I didn't really think it was a problem until I had an injury that I think was caused by sort of an overstrained tibialis posterior, and I think that may have been because of this collapsing arch and lack of ankle strength. But I've been working quite hard to incorporate as much of this as I possibly can. I guess like there's always, we are so inclined to try and seek out the easy, comfortable thing, right? And we see that in footwear. People recognize it's more difficult to run barefoot, or at least initially. It's more difficult to wear these less forgiving shoes. And so we seek out more foam. I have a lot of people that say to me that they're struggling with an injury, so they have tried to get more foam. And then I ask them, why do you want that foam? And I think like ultimately we're always looking for that comfort, right? We're always looking for something that's going to make things easier. And it's the same when we refuse to sit in these sort of positions. Like this podcast, because I respect you and I wanted to come on the podcast and show that respect, I am doing it on the floor, right?
Yay.
But it'd be much easier for me to sit in that chair.
Oh, yeah.
And much more comfortable for me to just be like, relaxed in that
at
chair.
this moment in time, though, Tommy. So it's at this moment. So
yes, right.
I've been in this new book. It's called Take the Stairs. So it's like, imagine you come off the tube and you're faced with the escalator or the stairs, right? Unless you're really present and in the moment, your limbic system will go, ooh, yeah. Based on a more primitive part of the brain that's always trying to assess threat, non-threat. Am I going to get injured? Am I going to conserve energy? So all the signage in the tube, hold the rail, all this is programming that same system to make you feel really incapable, right? So it's much more comforting to go, I'll stand on the escalator. Yeah, there's a metabolic cost for going up the stairs. But what's happening is you're becoming less and less capable, right? So the more and more rubber I put underneath my feet, the less capable my feet are. So people will say to me, how are you running it? Like, I mean, I run over some crazy terrain.
Yeah.
Like, at the weekend, there was all that, like, imagine like the big gravel, like they put down on paths. And I just said, like, I'm going to demonstrate something. So I was sprinting on it, right? And then I brake like that. So you see all the stones moving around. But sprinting, so there's 3 times my body weight in ground reaction forces. But to most people, if you wear lots of rubber and you take that off and you try and even stand on that stuff, you've lost all that capability because the rubber has desensitized you. We think we have more sensitive feet, but in theory, they're less sensitive. My feet are super sensitive because they know how to now become more malleable and dexterous.
Yes, right. I've seen you, like people say I've got sort of calloused feet because they might assume that the skin hardens, but I've seen you talk about how soft your feet are.
Yeah, so that's one way of viewing it. And the same is when it comes to sitting on the ground. So to begin with, when I started this journey, I had a big Pilates studio, right, with practitioners and massive client base. It was a big deal in London, near St John's Wood, and I had some amazing mentors that introduced me more into the forces that are involved in running and the posture and understanding that there was a way of moving naturally through a landscape, and we've just become very disconnected from it, right? And so I then started to go down the rabbit hole of Joseph Pilates' original work, pre arriving in New York above the New York City Ballet and it becoming very much about reconditioning ballet dancers, right? Prior to that, there was all contralateral movement in there. It was talking about equilibrium, joint actions, leverage, where your body weight should be when you're standing, balls of feet, big toes. All of that was in there. And just fascinating, even into the points of cold immersion. There's images of him like standing in his pants in the snow, except he was smoking a big cigar. But it was interesting to observe that, compared to my lens of actually teaching that practice. And what I started to see was most clients would arrive with knee problems, lower back injuries, and necks, which we know are actually the most stable areas in the human body. The knee is incredibly stable, can cope with like extraordinary amounts of forces, right?
Yeah.
And the same for the pelvis and the lumbar and the neck, except when we wear certain footwear and we sit in chairs, we actually start to redirect that stability elsewhere. So if you get quite sticky in the hips and stuck in the hips, where are you going to put that? That incredible movement that should be a huge ball and socket goes elsewhere, and that can be in the knee or in the lower back, right? So suddenly those areas become more mobile, more vulnerable. So if we looked at the human foot, it's incredibly stable, boom, incredibly stable. Then the ankle joint's incredibly mobile, and then the hip's incredibly stable. Sorry, the knee's incredibly stable, the hip's incredibly mobile, yeah? The lumbar and the pelvis are then incredibly stable, and the thoracic spine incredibly mobile. It can extend, flex, rotate, and then the neck has huge stabilizers in it to keep this head really stable above when we're doing things like running, right? When you sit down, however, we kind of go against all of that. The ankle doesn't get the level of dorsiflexion it needs. The knee never gets anywhere near the degree that it would need to understand its full role, its potential even. The hip gets stuck and we start to either slouch or we think we should sit more upright and get even more hip flexion.
Right.
Running, however, it requires a lot of hip extension. Yeah, not so much hip flexion. The hamstring is a huge pulling muscle. The hip learns to stabilize, and we just need to keep very strong and upright above it. So all of those all of those patterns would lead to, I guess, a flawed, complex movement of running. Now, when I'm faced with learning to sit on the ground, I have to go through what is discomfort to begin with. Now, if I just went, right, remove your chair, just sit on the floor all day, your part of your brain will go, that's hugely triggering.
Yeah.
And all kinds of stories will come up. And then we're also hit with the fact, a bit like New Year, New Me, kind of throwing everything at it in a very short window of time, rather than thinking, let's play with the edge and just gently incremental steps for much longevity and change. So for me now, to sit in a chair has become more uncomfortable. So in the book, for instance, the escalators and the stairs, I always choose the stairs. It's more uncomfortable for my mind because I know what I know now to stand on the escalator. Yeah. However, when I attempted the 1,000-mile running record, I couldn't go up the stairs. I then chose the escalator.
Yeah.
Because I was broken. I couldn't, at that point, so take the stairs for those that can't, right? Walk for those that can't, run for those that can't. But equally, ground sitting becomes, to begin with, incremental steps will lead to you're playing with the edge of discomfort. So eventually what the mind previously perhaps perceived as comfortable, suddenly you start to feel the lower back, the hips getting stiffer from sitting in a chair versus being on the ground. Because all those ground rest positions are mobility. I don't have to find any time for a flexibility class, for Pilates, for yoga, for stretching. I'm just on the ground. We don't have sitting furniture. So if I remove it, then it's great. But to get there, you can't remove that immediately. Just like the footwear conversation, you can't just go from rubberized footwear to nothing.
No.
We saw that. We were, at the time, coaching. We had a lot of compromised runners would come in with lots of rubber. So I had a guy arrive from Ireland. He was coaching fell runners. They had a massive business for it. It's called Champions Everywhere. It was based on Arthur Lydiard's model. And they were putting, like, a bit like Salazar, putting 100 miles through every athlete, right? And getting them they were fell runners. So imagine that's like you're up and you're down, bam, done. And there was one particular guy known as John Lenihan. Now, John Lenihan's a legend, right? So he had the title of King of the Mountains for this particular race, 12 years in a row, right? He's half marathon in the mountains. Do you know? Have a guess what that might be? Half marathon
in the mountains.
Yeah,
1:20.
63 minutes.
Mad,
right? But he grew up his dad was they were dairy farmers, and his dad would drive the truck and he used to run next to the truck. He had this whole wild like assault course out in the yard, climbing ropes and doing all this stuff, right? Just very different, right? Whereas the guy who approached me knocked at my door with 22 running injuries, despite having a running organisation.
Yeah, wow.
Putting 100 miles, and couldn't understand why all the runners were getting injured based on Arthur Lydiard's model. Why weren't Arthur Lydiard's athletes getting injured? Well, it's in a time period where people weren't sitting behind desks. So the guy who came to see me said, Rene, what do you do? What do you do for a living outside of running, outside of coaching? Oh, I'm in IT. So he would sit for 10 hours a day, then go and run. So his foundation of the complex movement of fell running was completely flawed. So I just returned him back to ground sitting postures over a period of time. Look, if you're watching a movie, can you spend a certain amount of time on the ground moving through these postures, then go back to the couch, right? And then over time, we're going to open that up. And then footwear. I don't want you to go to completely minimal footwear. Just buy footwear that's wide in a toe box, like an Ultra. And that was when they were wide. They had like Lone Peaks at that point. I think they've changed somewhat now, and they were zero drop, right? So there was no heel raise, but they still had a bit of compliance. So whilst his foot is relearning to become malleable and dexterous again over those surfaces, and he's gaining that sensory feedback, that footwear then I would then start to get lower and lower and lower. So he adapts. Otherwise, he's going to get hugely triggered because of the discomfort. Whereas if we can go little bit of discomfort, and keep playing with those edges. And I took away 22 running injuries in 6 months.
Wow.
Yeah. But properly 6 months, like done, not niggles, pains. It was just over that period of time, it's all done. Not an orthotic in sight. All the gear, no idea. He became all the gear again. And one of the guys in his group, who was his business partner, Jason, won King of the Mountains twice.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, when you're talking there, I mean, I get a lot of people that blame running for their injuries. And I do often ask them what they're doing outside of their running. And I have this strong belief that, our injuries are caused not by... It can't be. It can't be that the running is causing your injuries. How is it that something so natural is causing your injuries? No, it's the lifestyle. It's what are you doing in the 23 hours that you're not running? Yeah,
I had a big conversation. I've done a couple of pods with Rich Roll now, and we've had big conversations around this. And people blame it. We can now say exercise, right? So they blame an exercise, which they're only doing for 20, 30 minutes to an hour, rather than the 23 hours outside of it. Our performance is only as good as our recovery, and recovery is simply lifestyle. So one could say the way we sleep, the way we move, the way we breathe influences our performance, and the performance is the complexity, the expression of us, full expression. So running, people, I hold a lot of circles, and I get hit a lot with, I don't think I found my human potential. And okay, so this is the same conversation. How are you expecting to find human potential if you haven't learned even to express yourself physically how nature intended you to?
Yeah.
Because the mind knows, like, I'm not accessing what this thing is capable of. So therefore, how am I expecting it to reach its potential? Mentally, I might, but in the physical sense, I haven't. And we are the most incredible beings of expression, right? But if you're sitting for large proportions of your day, then that potential is challenged because you're getting locked in a framework that isn't natural at all for that potential. However, bit like the conversation with parents and kids at school sitting, sometimes it's an unavoidable sitting scenario, right?
Yeah, I was at a restaurant last night feeling a bit uncomfortable, and like actually went to I'll tell you a true anecdote last night. If Lou, my girlfriend, listens to this, she won't know I did this, but I was feeling a little bit like restless. So I got up and went to the loo, to the toilet, and I didn't need to, but I went in the cubicle and did some squats.
Yeah, or squat on the loo. Because my kids grew up without sitting furniture, right? So when we're out, they tend to, the little ones will just take the shoes off and kneel on the chairs or sit cross-legged, because again, that's more comfortable for them. It's uncomfortable for them to sit. They're not, they haven't been conditioned to it. Therefore, their normal template is the biological norm on the ground, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the same conversation. However, if you have that and you have a job where you have to sit, can you speak to the HR department and get a standing desk? Or could you set yourself up so that you have a routine? And I go into businesses like this, because this is welfare in the business as well, right? Mm-hmm. In the workplace, it's health and well-being, right? How many people get signed off with bad backs and they're not really associating it with just sitting for that large period of time? And we want people to go into programs where we might give them gym memberships and all this stuff. But again, if that foundation of that 1 hour in the gym is compromised, that gym hour is compromised for them, and they could then associate that with getting injured. And the bad news there is that we then think exercise is the problem. So then it's an even bigger excuse for that limbic system to go, told you so. Yeah. We shouldn't be using that much energy, and we have that risk of getting injured, and it can convince us that we just need to sit down again. Just standing up, if you sit down for a large proportion of your day, just standing up is a chemical metabolic cost. Changing shape and form is a metabolic cost. Therefore, that part of the brain will literally try and convince you to sit down again. That's why you see people get on the tube. There could be a fight for a chair. At an airport, it's like people might be sitting down for like 4 to 7 to 8, however many hours, but still choose to sit in the once they've gone through passport, right? So if it was really about, the performance, we'd think, well, how can I really work on the stuff outside of that 1 hour? What can I be doing? And for me, it's the playful aspect of being more opportunistic. Yeah. Because the play is a mind state. It's not choosing to play. It's choosing a mindset that will enable that. So it's a playful state of mind. We're familiar with that being flow state in the West, right? It's like, but that's it. Like, it's more opportunistic. I can see out around the pool where we are, there's a wall, and I'll balance on the wall, or I might jump up on the wall, or I might do a squat on the wall and jump off. And then the kids see me do it. They observe it. I don't teach them. Then they're doing it. And there's a constant interplay with that expression. So if you are finding yourself sitting, can you be more opportunistic in the work environment? Can you look at it and think, if I slide my desk away, my chair away from my desk, can I hold the desk so I've got a bit of an anterior support? Can I squat down? Don't worry about flat-footed squats. Actually allow your heel to lift, because what you want is to encourage the posture within your squat, because that is an overlap then into the running posture or your walking posture. Whereas if you try and get the heel down, chances are you're going to be really rounded in your back if you're not familiar with it, because that's the shape in the chair. Then can you go for a walk and then come back and then sit down? Just that alone, you could set a timer, you could have a post-it note on your desk suggesting just go move. And all of that will then help nourish running. So I'm an ultra endurance athlete, right? So that might mean running for 12 hours, 24 hours, or consecutive days of that. So if I sit down all day, so my sophisticated part of my brain that's always trying to conserve energy, that's a huge chemical metabolic cost. So for runners in here that might want to stretch time out there, you have to experience in time on supports before that, because we're talking about load, aren't we, right? And physical load in running, not just cardiovascular. It's a strength conditioning exercise. So before you go and run for 12 hours, can you stand up for 12 hours a day on 2 feet? And squatting is part of that. So squatting is different to chair sitting. Squatting, you still have the same weight on your feet as when you stand. Rather than chair sitting, you don't have the weight on your feet. So to go onto your feet is suddenly like, this is, So you could look at that. You could go between squatting and a standing desk, because that's physiological conditioning for running, because it's the same weight on your feet, your posture, the form you can work on whilst you're at that desk. I will say with the forms in squatting is that you want to get to a point where you feel that 2/3 of your weight is in the front of your foot and only 1/3 is in your heel.
Yeah.
So the collapsed ankle conversation is when we start to still squat in the heel.
Yeah.
And you'll find the ankles will roll in slightly. And that becomes then a foundation of the more complex standing. So when we stand up, we find that we're more collapsed in the ankle because that's the position we've been choosing for load. So what you can do when you're first learning to squat for periods of time is just put something underneath your heel, like a wedge or a broom handle or something like that. We'll just encourage a little bit of lift, and it will get more weight in the front end of that foot. So that's what I'd even prescribe for you at the moment, Tom, is just to get a little like magazine edge, like the hard binding edge of a magazine. Just drop that behind your heel for a bit and start to work more on, can you get your chest up a bit higher? And that will start feeding into the posture, of which we need for standing, for walking and running.
I could talk to you forever, Tony. But we should land the plane. And so you're 53.
50? No, 50. I'm 50.
You're 50?
I'm 51 this year, just in a couple of months. Yeah.
My bad. I don't know why. I thought you were 53.
It's okay.
But you move better than most 21-year-olds, and you seem like you have more life than so many people in their mid-20s. And I know that longevity is kind of becoming a bit of an overused term, but people think of longevity maybe as lifespan. How long can you live? This book that you are releasing very soon speaks more of health span, I guess I could say, right? And it's about this idea of bringing more life to your years rather than more years to your life, right?
Absolutely, that's the saying. Yeah, it's in there.
I guess I always want to try and get people excited for this stuff. I found your stuff exciting. I find movement exciting. I find all of this stuff exciting. I want to feel more alive for long into my life, right? How do you express this for people who maybe are working at KPMG or whatever, and they're at an office job all day, and they're not really that interested in this stuff, but they're inevitably compromising their physical potential and their human potential by sitting in these compromising positions and stuff? And how do you get them to be interested enough in order to take action and to talk to the HR department and do these things? What is it about this that is the most powerful to you?
Well, I think the statement is where you just landed it, because that's my strapline really. It's not about adding years to your life. It is just life to your years. And who doesn't want to wake up? Who doesn't want to wake up feeling their best or feeling like they're thriving in the everyday environment? And that can, again, they can be small incremental shifts. There's not many people I know that haven't woken up and gone, I know I'm more than this. I know there's more to me, and I know there's more to get out of this world than what I have right now. And you have everything inside of you to change that. And that's mind, it's internal language, it's things like breath that help then get your default mode network operating at a different frequency, let's say. So we go, okay, I'm out of that now. What can I be doing to change and shift that? Who doesn't feel better? There's a lot of runners in here. Who doesn't come back from a run and go, oh yeah, I feel amazing right now. Oh, that's great. And there's a moment in there where it might be, oh, this feels gnarly. And the more and more you get the foundations right, the less of the gnarly you experience, And so that speaks to life. It's like every element of life will improve from you doing the work. And that work doesn't have to be the huge influencers that we see on these platforms. It's your own interpretation of that and what you can find the time for. But it is work, and it does involve leaning in somewhat, right? And I think it's understanding that's ultimately what we're up against. Again, I hold a lot of circles, and it's throughout those circles, it's about this potential piece. Yeah, I want to find purpose, and I want to reach my potential, and that can be across the board. And so this next book is very much about that, because it's not just physical exercise. It's about the language that we have to use internally. It's about changing our own belief systems within it and our behaviors, right? And they come hand in hand, those things. But I would say it's just closing your eyes for a moment and just imagining yourself as that person who you see yourself as, and keep making the steps towards that person. And I'd say we can speak to nutrition at this moment and think that there's so much information out there, Tommy, right? We'd have to be pretty blinkered to not know what we should and shouldn't be doing when it comes to food, because there's so much information there, right? And it's obvious what we shouldn't be doing, yet we still are caught up in that, right? We have to question why. And there are certain systems within us where we are upregulated, and there might be a bit of stress in our lives, which then makes it much easier to operate at that level, where I'll still choose the food. It can be a pacifier, whatever it is, right? So if you can learn to calm your nervous system, self-regulate, then chances are you're going to have a much easier ride when it comes to any change that you're looking to implement. Yeah. I don't know about you, but personally, I feel as I mature, I want to think that I can still perform at a certain level, right? That performance is key to me, and that potential. I'm redefining for me what it is to be 50. And when I was in my 20s and 30s, I actually thought I was just indestructible, right? And yet a lot of my close friends around me that we're starting to reconnect lately, we went on a bit of a trajectory where our paths separated because I was considered as this quite socially extreme character, right? But it's starting to come back again. And there's a lot happening for those guys right now. One of them voiced that 50s is like Sniper Alley. We're all getting taken out, you know, but it doesn't have to be that way. It really doesn't have to be that. There's certain things that are, you know, you are out of your control. But actually, if you start taking control of the things you can take control of, then you're going to have an amazing life, you know? And it's not about materialistic want, right? This is just about getting your fundamental needs met. So someone voiced to me who came to stay, we spent 2 days together. He spent time with the family and just an immersion in a way, as we do here. And I had this conversation around ancestral health being modern day wealth. And he just said, I think you need to reframe it. Having spent 2 days with you, I can see that ancestral health is billionaire wealth. Yeah. He just said, he basically said, I've never actually had a jealous bone in my body, but just spending time with you and the family and the way that you're living I came away thinking, oh my God, I want that, you know? And so we've just made steps to move towards that. And already in a very short window of time, he's thriving, right? And they're very simple steps. It doesn't take much. It's just, as we've spoken to, it's the stuff outside the hour in the gym. Start spending more time on that, more consideration on that. And you'll find that run you go on just will become more of a natural expression of you. And you'll start to express, I guess what nature intended you to be, why you're actually here, you know?
And then you can actually tune in with your own nature and who you actually are, right? Because you have had all these different influences come in from these artificial places, whether it's work or your friends or whatever else. You've never actually figured out who you are. You get to that age and you've never tuned in with your own nature. You've never done it physically and you've never done it psychologically.
It's a challenge without, hitting on all the influencer words of authenticity, right? But it's getting to a point where you're an authentic expression of you. So the run you go on is an authentic run. The walk is an authentic walk. You go into the workplace as an authentic expression of you, rather than not quite you. So therefore that's even more tiring.
Yeah.
Because you can't, or you go for a job interview and you're like, oh, I really wish I showed up there. I can't believe I didn't show up. But again, it depends how you're showing up outside of that as to how authentic that expression would be,
Yeah. Tony, thank you for coming on.
Much deeper, of course, than a running conversation. But it does overlap to running.
Hey, we love
running is an authentic expression, right?
We love going deep. Running is an authentic expression. It is and has been the most powerful thing for me. And I often joke that it's not that deep, but then I have a podcast that goes often very deep. And listeners, I believe, will resonate with a lot of what you've said. How can they pre-order or pick up Take the Stairs? Is it Take the Stairs?
It's Take the Stairs. It was always Take the Stairs, and then it just became. It was kind of the front cover just felt too messy with the wording.
Yeah. You got people involved.
I put it out there to my audience. Yeah, because we had one which was me squatting in the garden with the Riddle kids, and that was going to be called the Longevity Lifestyle. So I put it out to the audience, and of course, when you put that out to Instagram, you're going to get the people that are really familiar with you. Were all like, "Yeah, we love the one in the garden squatting." But then I put it out to my mailing list and it came back. We love the stairs. And to the point, people are already voicing, Tony, since seeing that, I've already started taking the stairs. Yeah. And it's much more relatable. It lands seeing that image.
I have to say, I voted for, because I know and love what you do, I voted for the one on the left, and then now that I've seen it, I was like, oh no, we went with a different one. I was so wrong. I think it's the better name and cover.
Yeah,
I think it's far more. I think it's far more wide spanning and appealing to a larger audience.
So just to spit, what's your turnaround on it here? How quickly did you get your pods out?
At the moment, we're about a 2 or 3 week turnaround.
Because we're going to print on the. I think it's the 10th of April. It's like 15 days away.
Okay.
And if anyone listening to this goes on to the pre-order, which we can perhaps put in the show notes, that's a signed copy from me. Wow, and their name goes in the book, and they're in with a chance of winning like a golden ticket, which gives them, there's 5 golden tickets. And that's a retreat with me. So there's an opportunity. So that's in pre-order phase. So before it gets to print, which is goes out, is on the, I believe it's the 10th of April. That should know really, shouldn't I? Too busy enjoying myself. And yeah, so that would, they'd have a signed copy. Outside of that, there's no more signed copies, but their name gets in the book. I sign it to them, right? Me. I'm flying to Barcelona for that. And then there's a golden ticket in there, Willy Wonka style.
Wow,
yeah,
that's great. Well, maybe I'll release it before. So if you're listening to this and it's before the 10th of April, there is an opportunity to pre-order and be in the book.
Yeah,
and potentially go on one of these amazing retreats, which you've heard snippets from this whole time. Thanks, there. Tony. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Tommy.
A lot of people say don't meet your heroes. But when your heroes are people who care deeply and sincerely about people and the well-being of others, as Tony does, I think it is only a privilege. And he's seen it time and time again. He's seen the effects of the work that he does, of this return to our human nature, this reconnection with ourselves, with our surroundings, with a natural way of being, which we are so disconnected from. I recognize a lot of what Tony may have been talking about will seem extreme. It's different. But isn't it a shame that it seems extreme? It seems extreme to take your shoes off. It seems extreme to opt not to sit in a chair. I think a lot of what he says is not extreme. I think so much of the way we live is extreme. It's extremely disconnected and artificial and convenient and softening. And when I say softening, I mean all you have to do is look around. All you have to do is look around at how people are feeling, how people are living, and surely there's a better way. You can only conclude there's a better way. Many of you will be runners and you may not be as interested in the holistic approach like this, but I want to encourage you to consider, for the sake of recovery, for the sake of your own well-being, what you're doing outside of your running. What is it that is causing the niggles and pains and injuries in your life? Is it the running? Is it something that humans have been doing for millennia? Is it this natural movement that we love so much? Or is it everything that's happening outside of your running? Is it the way you're living, the way you're being, the way you're moving? Perhaps if I want to encourage one key takeaway from this episode, it would be to consider movement as play. To consider the fact that if you frame your running and your training as exercise or as training, as work, perhaps it's not as sustainable, perhaps it's not as enjoyable, perhaps it's worth considering it as playful, as exciting, as interesting in that way. Perhaps that's how you'll integrate more of this stuff into your life. I hope sincerely that you enjoyed this episode. It was nothing but a privilege for me to sit down with someone that I have admired so much, someone whose words I've been reading, and someone who's influenced me so much. And I have seen the effects of some of what he teaches in my own body, in the way I move. I'm on a journey to live more naturally, and that is because of Tony Riddle. Thank you, Tony, for coming on. It means a huge amount. And if you enjoyed this episode, if you enjoyed this podcast, rate it, send it to a mate, subscribe or follow if you want to. Get involved in the comments down below. Run the runnable. Keep showing up for yourself. And I'll see you next time.